Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will be doing my final playoff preview video for the StarLadder Budapest Major, as I've been breaking down all the quarterfinals matchups that we were guaranteed to get, and so I'm just going to finish it off with this one. I've also already put out my playoff pick'em, but by the time you're watching, it's probably too late to do anything about that one. Also, by now, when I've released this video, I'm pretty sure the Spirit Falcons game will have already taken place, as well as the Vitality Mongols game will have already taken place. It's just there's only 3 days between the group stage and the playoffs, so it was kind of hard to fit in all the playoff preview videos before the actual matches began. But by the time I put this video out, this match will not have happened yet. You know, the second day of the quarterfinals will be, of course, when we have Furia playing Na'Vi. So if you haven't checked out that preview video, you can go check that out. And then, of course, we will have this one where we got Mousesports taking on FaZe Clan. And so, yeah, we're going to dig into it. But before we do, folks, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Again, we've already really hit our goal for the year for subscribers, but we're looking just to see if we can keep the momentum going, keep the channel growing, and, yeah, just keep capitalizing, you know, on the content around the major and through the end of this year. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a like, leave a comment. Those things certainly help the algorithm. And, yeah, we'll just kind of keep on pushing. But without further ado, let's hop into it, and we will start with Mousesports. Now, Mousesports is a team that has been very solid all year long. You know, I think, you know, the first half of the year, the first season, when Vitality, you know, won their 7 events in a row and their 37 best of 5, best of 3s in a row and had the most dominant season ever, this was the team that often played second fiddle to Vitality. They made a lot of grand finals. They ran up against Vitality many times, and they just kept falling short. It was very reminiscent of what kind of happened back when Astralis was having their era and Liquid was kind of playing second fiddle to them for a very long time through like kind of the 2018-2019 time period. And, you know, it was kind of reminiscent of that, the relationship between Vitality and Mousesports, a very one-sided rivalry, I guess you could say. Now, there were times last season where a team like Falcons or a team like Spirit would be able to kind of jump ahead of them in the rankings, but for a lot of the time, Mouse was in the number 2 position and never really fell out of the top 4, in my opinion. And when you really look at this season, it was pretty much the same story. I mean, they've kind of remained at or around the same level. Yes, they have seen Falcons once again kind of surpass them. Yes, they have seen Furia leapfrog them and climb up to the number 1 ranking in the world. And yes, you would still put Vitality ahead of Mousesports, though this season it is true that Mousesports are able to get over on Vitality a time or two. So yeah, you know, it's kind of a weird spot for them where I feel like a lot of teams are probably pretty happy with where they were at if they were in Mouse's position. But if you're Mousesports, you feel like you've kind of hit the wall. You know, you feel like you've really kind of maxed out what you're capable of, and unfortunately, it's just not good enough to be a world number 1 or a team that wins trophies. You know, yes, this team did win Cluj-Napoca earlier this year. It was actually, I think, their first event with Spinks, if I'm not mistaken, where they beat Falcons in that best of 5 grand final. But other than that, they have, you know, made some grand finals, had some second place finishes, obviously often finished top 4. They really finished outside the top 4, actually. And that's just kind of where they're hard stuck at, though. But with that said, you know, they're on home soil for Torzi in Budapest, and, you know, they obviously do have a lot of talent. You know, it's one thing we can always kind of credit this team for. You know, I think Torzi is a really solid opper. I do think at times he was a top 5 opper in the world. I do think at times he was, you know, really fighting up there, you know, but sometimes that form can kind of waver a little bit here and there, right? Then you think of someone like Spinks. Spinks is an incredibly good trade fragger. He plays a lot of star CT positions, does very well at that. Extremity rifler in defaults mainly, but on this team he has taken some more active roles, like, you know, for instance on Inferno, more of a mid player, whereas he was kind of an apartments player in the past with Vitality. So there's been some pivots there, but he also takes on, again, like a lot of star CT positions, like being the A rifler on Overpass or something like that on the CT side, and so kind of has that mix, kind of that flex rifler capability. But I feel like his strengths are when he can just kind of pack up with, you know, Zershin and some of the others and just kind of trade frag and then play his star CT roles. Jimmy, kind of the anchor and other extremity rifler, the more passive force of the team. Definitely not as strong of a player as he was last year when he was looking like a prospect for Falcons and was touted as like the best anchor in the world or competing with Bit for that title. He's definitely not at that level, but it's still decent, and it can still have games where he pops off and can have tournaments where he still plays really well. And then Zershin is one of the best entry fraggers in the world, still one of the better aggressive riflers out there. He also plays a lot of the main aggressive CT positions and does take a very high percentage of their opening attempts on the T sides we'll talk about later. And so this is a team that kind of similar to a team like Falcons or a team like Vitality or a team like Furia, does have a lot of widely distributed talent on the team. They're certainly not as, top heavy as, a team like Spirit that has someone like Donk, who's the best aggressive rifler in the world. They don't really have a guy that you would necessarily consider the best in any one role. Certainly, again, Xerxon would fall down the list to entry fraggers like, a Donk, or maybe even the type of form that, Kendar's been in lately for Furia, and Kiyosuke, what he's been doing with Falcons so far. Like, he's going to be in the debate, but he's not going to be your number one. Same thing with Spinks. Like, he's a great trade fragger, great in his roles, but he's probably not going to be number one. He's far from number one in opping. Jimmy now is removed from being in that top anchor conversation. After a bit, you'd probably talk about a guy like Heavy God, obviously Rops. There's all these other guys out there you'd really kind of, put ahead of him in that regard. Still, though, a lot of talent and a lot of good results to talk about. I mean, if we just look at this season, coming off the back of a top 4 finish at the Blast Austin Major, they made the grand finals to Cologne, came second there, and then again, their only finish outside the top 4 was the EWC, but that was kind of a weirder format, single elimination, best of 3 bracket, no group stage, no second chances, and so that was the one event they fell outside of the top 4, but every other event they have been able to at least find themselves in 4th position. Again, they did win their first event of the year back at Cluj, where they did beat Falcons, obviously, was kind of the big one after losing them earlier in the group stage, and then again, throughout a lot of the season, it was mostly just Vitality battering them. Again, Vitality getting them in the groups of EPL. Vitality ultimately beating them in the best of 5 grand final, for a second place finish there. Then you go to Blast Open Lisbon, this time it goes all 5 maps, but it's still a pretty dominant win, all things considered, for Vitality in the maps that they actually won. And again, just playing second fiddle to Vitality, that was the only team that beat them at this tournament, similar to EPL, where they were beating everyone else. And you go to Melbourne, this time it was Falcons. That's kind of what I was talking about. There was a little brief period there where Falcons were kind of jumping ahead of them, and it happened again at Blast Rivals. But then by the time Dallas rolls around, MOUZ were able to get back in the driver's seat, actually be able to beat Falcons, beat Mongols, but again, just could not get past Vitality. And the Blast Austin Major was the exact same thing. They were able to beat everyone else they played in the BO3s after losing the opening 2 BO1s, but then again, Vitality just best them. Now, this time at Cologne, they were able to beat Vitality, but it was this time Spirit who was able to beat them 0-3 in a BO5 grand final. Falcons were the ones that knocked them out of EWC. Blast Open London, they, were able to, get up in there, but once again, it was Vitality leapfrogged them yet again. EPL, it was this time Falcons, once again, kind of similar to last season, like midway through this season, again, Falcons kind of leapfrogs ahead of them. Fury obviously gets ahead of them as well, but funnily enough, they are the one team that's been able to beat Fury head to head. They beat them here in Chengdu, and I beat them here as well in Cologne. So only 2 times, to be fair. This was earlier on in Furia's time together with this lineup. But yeah, all in all, still a very solid team with a lot of good results. And so far at this major, I mean, pretty much took care of business. I mean, they won their opening BO1s, no problem. Yeah, they lose the best through the Spirit, but that's always been kind of a matchup that's been historically, back and forth and just very tight games. Here losing to them 1-2, and that matchup against Spirit, losing to them 0-2, in Blast Bounty, losing to them 0-3 in Cologne and 1-2 in this best of 3. But then they had beat Spirit obviously at the Blast Austin Major and had some success, in the past against them as well. So always a closer matchup. But then they were able to get over Falcons, a team that had given them trouble in Chengdu, a team that had given them trouble obviously at EPL, and a team that gave them some troubles at points last season as well. So all in all, in pretty good shape. But there are, again, some discrepancies with this team that we have to kind of talk about, and it is really that there are some map pool worries and particularly T-side worries for this team. If you look at a map like Ancient, they have only won 3 of their last 13 games played on this map. So very, very strong team on this map, the first season of the year. But obviously, if you look at this season, so if we just look at kind of the last 6 months, so last Austin Major forward, again, it's been grim, and their T-sides has been the problem. And this is going to be kind of a consistent theme we're going to hit where, they're only winning 40% of their T-sides on Ancient. I mean, that's just incredibly poor, and has really led to this map falling off of their map pool after it had been in the past a very strong map for the team that they could really use quite a lot. Then you look at a map like DusT 2, and this season they've only played it twice. They have won it both times against Liquid and Spirit, and they're actually 8-3 in their last 11. So if you look at kind of their whole year on DusT 2, it started off very rough, and it was even at times a map they would avoid, but they have been getting better at it. That is certainly something that is worth noting. Then you look at a map like Inferno, good record overall for the year, good record overall on both sides of the map early in the year, and generally been pretty good, have played it a lot, and have actually gotten stronger on it, really throughout the course of this season, which is certainly good news for them. It kind of makes up for Ancient falling off. But after the positivity of their Inferno picking up steam to make up for Ancient falling off, here's where we start hitting some trouble points again. Because if you look at, Blast Austin Major Forward, basically this season, they have gone 8-11 on this map. They have lost their last 7 out of 10 games, and they are sporting a 43% win rate on the T side, which is pretty abysmal and very, very worrisome. Then you look at Nuke for this season, 6-6 record. They've actually lost their last 5 out of 8 games, and once again, their T side is totally poor. Yes, Nuke historically has been a CT-sided map, but not the case anymore these days, and this is dreadfully bad. Only winning 39% of your T-side rounds is just totally awful, and it's really, really worrisome. Then you look at a map like Overpass. They've been playing this the last 6 months. 6-3 record. Not too shabby in that regard, but again, their T-sides are a major, major concern. Really having to rely on super big CT sides. And yes, Overpass is one of the more CT-sided maps, but still, this is just like well below what it should be even for a quote-unquote CT-sided map. And then you look at a map like Train, and this is where things finally kind of come back to the light, I guess you could say, for Mousesports, where they've actually been very, very strong on Train this season. They've won their last 8 games in a row, 9-1 record, from Blast Austin Major and forward, and it's one of the maps where they do well enough on the T side for another map that, is seemingly a very CT-sided map, right? They actually are able to get some T rounds on the board. So when it's all said and done, you have a team that has fallen off dreadfully on Ancient, and that is now a weak factor for them that you have to worry about. It's definitely a very big vulnerability. Their DusT 2 and Inferno are pretty good. Their Overpass has been okay, and their Train is pretty good. So I'd say they have 3 really good maps, and then like a fourth map that's pretty solid. But I feel like they have really caused for a lot of concern on Mirage, Nuke in particular, and then obviously their Ancient is completely fallen off. Now, yes, they can ban one of these options in a best of 3, but that still is going to leave a couple of vulnerabilities out there. And I think, just generally speaking, their T sides being incredibly weak outside of what they've been doing on DusT 2, maybe what they've been doing on Inferno, and then what they've been doing on Train, is definitely a cause for concern. Particularly if they, start trying to make a deeper run of these playoffs and they have to go up against a Furia or something like that in the semifinal. That's where things are going to get really, really dreadful for them because, Furia just has such a deep map pool and is very, very good on both sides of the map and can match them in skill power. Now, if we're looking at player form across this season, again, Spinks has definitely been the highlight of the team. Xerxin definitely been a highlight as their aggressive rifler. But we have seen Torzy's form actually drop a little bit this season compared to earlier this year. And then again, Jimmy is still just nowhere near the heights that he used to be. And then Brolin is kind of drifting into, lower fragger territory for an IGL, and I think that was kind of the hope that he would be a higher fragging IGL, and there has been times where he has been, but it's still, starting to fall in a really rough spot. When we kind of look at openings on the T side, again, Xerxin is going for a very high amount, but its success rate isn't crazy high. It's a little bit higher than Flames, but it's nowhere near as high as some of the elite entries that we're seeing right now, to the akin of a Donkey, a Kindar, a Xantares, some of the other guys that are Kiyosuke, what he's been doing, it's just not quite up to speed when you look kind of just overall, the last 6 months or so, this is where things have generally just not been as good. And really that has been a big issue for them on the T sides, is that they don't have any opening power, and part of that could just be because tactics are bad, supporting utility isn't as good as it needs to be, mid-round calling is not as good as it needs to be, but also part of it is just not being able to have like a strong entry that can create space for you. I think that is certainly a big concern. Now, CT side, I mean, they got it in spades across the board. Spinks playing a mix of pretty aggressive positions as well as Xerxin. These 2 aggressive riflers are doing a whole bunch of fucking work for them. This is where Torzy can really wreak havoc, as well as a pretty aggressive CT side opper who has a lot of success in his openings as well. So, this is what kind of saves them a little bit in that regard. If we're looking at kind of the last 3 months of form, again, it's kind of a similar story with Torzy dropping even a little bit more. And then the openings on the T side, we are seeing Xerxin pick up the pace a little bit. After having a rough start to the season, he's doing a good bit better. This is more what you need to be seeing out of your star entry fragger. So that is good news for MOUZ, that this is, started to pick up a little bit of steam. Spinks is even able to create a little bit of openings here and there as well in some of his more active positions. So that is certainly good news. Again, CT sides are still quite good. Then, when you're kind of looking at this major so far, so basically just this stage of the major should be the only thing on here. Yeah, I do believe that is correct. Cool. We're kind of seeing the pattern generally hold of Xerxen and Spink still really kind of doing the heavy lifting for the team. Jimmy's been playing all right. Torgy's been all right, but, Brolin has really been kind of struggling. When you're looking at the openings, we're seeing Brolin going for a lot more. It's actually kind of put Xerxen's yield down quite a lot. His success rate also hasn't been that great, though, in some of these. But it's only 8 maps, so I'm not quite sure this is going to play out in playoffs, but this is certainly something that's alarming, and it harkens back to issues that Xerxen had earlier this season with his T-side entering, and just generally speaking, the T-sides of his team really being poor. Again, though, their CT sides are just totally on point, and that is going to be kind of what they're going to have to rely upon to do big things going through these playoffs. Now, when we look at FaZe, this team is just kind of an enigma wrapped in another enigma. I don't really know what to make of FaZe going into these playoffs. This is a team that historically has had rough seasons, but then have found ways to make it work in majors. Obviously, the first half of this year, for instance, things weren't going so well, so much to the point that they benched Brokey went for a Hail Mary with Simple and actually were able to make the playoffs of the Blast Austin major, but then quickly fell out in the quarterfinal. And it's feeling like this major may kind of be that story repeating itself. I don't think it's going to be a situation like the Shanghai major where they were kind of having their rough patches the second half of last year, but then managed to make a run all the way to the grand finals of the Shanghai major. I don't really foresee that happening this time around. It feels a little bit more like the first major this year, where this might be where their tournament ends. But what I will say for sure is that despite the rough season, as we'll kind of dig into a little bit, it is a point where Frozen has been a rock for this team for a long time and is putting up a really good performance. He's taken on a lot of Rops' roles in many cases, in those extremity roles in the T side, does some good trade fragging behind Kerrigan and company, so definitely can be unlocked in the mid to late round in those regards. Plays a mixture of like anchor and more active positions on the CT side, again taking some of Rops' roles, and does those really well. Then Twist has come in, he hit the ground running since the trade happened, with him and Elige, and serves as kind of another extremity rifler on the T sides for the team, but can get involved to be a little bit more active as well at times, can be a good trade fragger, plays a good mix of star CT positions and does really well in them. But then after that, it's like Brokey has been really poor all year long, and certainly didn't do much better once he came off the bench and got the rest or whatever he needed. Has really struggled overall this year. Has had his moments this last stage of the major that we just watched, as we'll talk about, but still is a concern point. And then Jacob, he's been concerning as well because he has not adjusted well to being on this team overall, right? Obviously, it's a tough one moving from Apogee to FaZe. The level of competition is much higher than what he's used to. He's playing different roles when he was playing on Apogee, having to be more of the primary entry first guy in instead of being able to play more of the training positions like he was getting on the Apogee team, though he is getting some of the star CT roles that you would want. But he started to come alive this major. Now, will that hold in the playoffs as him being a, rookie to a playoff position at a major? And that is going to be obviously an interesting thing to watch. But at least we're starting to see him finally click a little bit. He definitely has some good mechanical ability. You can kind of see that. But my problem is that they're still very reliant on Frozen and Twist to really hold them through. And while they're up against Mousesports in this quarterfinal, a team that has issues with T-sides that this team could exploit, it's like, man, they're going to need Frozen and Twist to continue to deliver at a very, very high level. They're going to need the Jacob we saw in Stage 3 continue to perform the way he was performing in Stage 3, and then Brokey's going to have to just have some magical performance like he did there in the playoffs of the Shanghai Major or some shit like that for them to have, really any hope of them being able to do a whole lot in these playoffs. Again, if we're looking, there was a tough year where you're just seeing them finishing like in these 9 to 12 positions in some tournaments, which is something that they should really never be doing. Their only big finishes are in events that had smaller fields for the most part, with the exception of Inclusion of Poca. There was actually a good bit of good teams at this event, but Bucharest was a field that was a little bit weaker. They came third. I think that was the event that Falcons won. So there were a couple of good teams there, and this is an okay finish, but still not great. Then you go into the last Austin Major, they go to the Hail Mary, they make the top 8 finish. That's great, but then you go into this season, again, it's back to not doing much. Some 9th to 12 finishes, dead last finish at Chengdu, going into the major. CAC was also pretty much dead last, and so it's just not been great. You kind of look at the games, and, early in the season, at Cologne, did well in the play-in. Then they, were able to beat Liquid and Aurora to make the quarterfinals where they lose to Na'Vi. EWC, not going to say too much there because of the format was kind of wonky. This was mostly online, but their only offline game was against G2 where they get beat. Then Fissure, now they're losing. Yeah, the Falcons and Mongols, fair enough. But, Liquid This one-sided loss should not be happening when you're the caliber of team that FaZe is supposed to be, so this was very damning. You go to EPL losing to 3D Max, and then it's pretty damning stuff. Their other 2 losses, fair enough to Vitality and MOUZ, 2 top 4 teams in the world. You can kind of get past that, but then you go to CAC, they're losing to fucking Navi's old academy team in Foot. Like, what are we doing here? You know, you're having to go 3 maps against Bait. Yeah, you dominated 2 maps, what you won, but still, like, the fact that Mirage went to multiple times and you lost, it shouldn't be happening. With the caliber of team that FaZe is supposed to be, you know, dropping a map to Tai Lu, and then losing to Foot, like, this is a really, really poor performance. Then Chengdu, you're losing to Virtus Pro, and you're getting blown out by them. Like, this just can't be happening. Then you go to the first stage, we've already kind of talked about, first stage in the Major, really, really rough start in the BO1s, but the more damning thing is the fact that they nearly got knocked out by Red Canids. They had a miracle in Nuke to get them to stay alive in this tournament. And then they lost a map to Fluxo, and even this Mirage game was testy. So very, very rough stage 1. And yeah, stage 2, they course corrected. They were able to, you know, win every game that they played. You know, they didn't drop a map in stage 2, great. They did beat Vitality in BO1 in stage 3. Got waxed, though, whenever they played against any other elite team, and even Moggles is with the stand-in controls. But then they beat 3D Max, and they beat Passion UA, and it's like you're beating some of the weaker teams in the field to make the playoffs, which makes this run, you know, not quite as convincing. But yes, you'd only beat the teams in front of you. Yes, you have improved as the Major has gone on, so that is good news, but there's still a lot of concern there. You know, if we're looking at map pool since Twist has joined the team, and obviously what some of this rain was in instead of Jacob, and so that's kind of why I've filtered it this way. But if you look, you know, since Twist has joined the team, Ancient, they're 3-3 on the map. Really, really tough to really know. And then even if you take, they've all had their own struggles on T-sides, by the way. You know, speaking of a team like MOUZ having their struggles with T-sides and their Ancient being in really rough shape, they're not necessarily in the best position to punish them because they're a team that's actually lost to MOUZ in one-sided fashion on Ancient, which should be a, you know, weak point for MOUZ. And then they also lost a Foot on the map. So then you kind of wonder, and if you kind of go back to kind of just the team overall this year, you know, it's been at points okay for them, you know, like middle of the year. You know, had some good results there, but, you know, rougher start to the year at times. And then obviously, you know, this season, it's been really rough for them over, you know, these last, you know, 5 to 6 months or so. Then you go to a map like DusT 2. This map has been pretty much 50-50 for them all year, right? I mean, it's really hard to have a whole lot of faith in this one. And then if you're just kind of looking at this season, you know, basically the same story. So really not sure what to expect on a map like DusT 2. When you go to Inferno, you know, basically the same story, kind of 50-50 map. They have been really pulverizing teams, though, at the Major. I mean, that must be said, so that's certainly good news. But again, these are against some of the weaker teams in the Major, and so it's really hard to, you know exactly what that means, you know, going into this, right? Then you look at a map like Mirage, again, kind of 50-50 map for them, middle of the road, had some struggles on the T side this season for sure. Similarly to a team like Mousesports have had their struggles on the T side. You know, at the Major, they're 2-2, so that 50-50 pattern is kind of holding. And then you go to a map like Nuke. It has been better for them this season. I will admit they've been doing well on both sides of the map, 9-5 record. I think this is a map that is one of the potential punishes that they could have against MOUZ, who have struggled on Nuke lately. This is actually one of the ones that they might be able to put to use in this best of 3, and something to maybe kind of keep a lookout for. So that is one positive thing I can say about their map pool. Overpass, not been great, you know, for FaZe. Then you go to Train, and they've only played it twice this season. Both of them have been pretty one-sided losses and have been rough on both sides of the map. And then if you just kind of want to zoom out for the year, they've never really played Train a lot. It's been a ban for them a lot of the time. Lost it the last 3 times in a row that they've played it. Overpass, you zoom out. Again, they don't play it that much. So it's tough because, like, there's things you could exploit on Mousesports. Mousesports having their struggles on Mirage, having their struggles on Nuke, having their struggles on Overpass, having their struggles on Ancient. But you're a team that is in the same boat, where you're having your own struggles this season on some of these same maps, on some of these same T-sides, and it's like you can't even go after the punish on Ancient. Like, maybe they can make Ancient work this Major. Like, that's something to think of. I think probably going for Nuke is probably going to be a target for them, but it's like, man, I just don't know what to expect. They're just such a mystery going into this match. I mean, as far as player form goes, with this 5-man lineup across 35 matches, they have actually been able to play together. Again, Rain obviously played for Jacob at EPL. You know, even once Twist joined the team. Yeah, Twist and Frozen are lighting up. They've been playing very, very well. You look at, you know, how things are going on the T side. I mean, this is like worse than Jane levels of passivity from Brokey, by the way. Like, he's just a non-fucking factor on the T side. Yes, he's throwing support utility. whatever. I mean, you got to have, that is ridiculously low. I'm sorry. Just wanted to point that one out. Obviously, a Twist and Frozen, not known to be going for really openings. Kerrigan, very weak opener. I mean, this is so bad. So, again, you can really see some of the struggles this team has had, and it's very, very noteworthy. You know, CT side, again, Brokey, a little more active, but still on the more passive end of the spectrum for CT side operators. But the others are doing really well defensively with the exception of Kerrigan. Now, if you want to look at just the major with this 5-man lineup, Frozen and Twist still playing incredibly well. Jacob has picked up steam, particularly in this latest stage, and Brokey has had his moments this major. So that is good news. When you look at the openings on the T side, you are, you know, seeing a little bit more activity from Frozen, but still not very much. You know, again, it still really does come down to Kerrigan and Jacob, but it's still just not very good. Not very good at all. You know, that is really, really worrisome. If I look at just this last stage, though, and kind of look at things have gotten a little bit better. Like, Jacob's entering is a little bit higher. You know, you've seen Frozen kind of being able to contribute a little bit in some of these openings on the T side, which has been a nice kind of added X factor. But, you know, still there is some discrepancies there, which can really be kind of alarming, you know, as well. So we'll have to really keep an eye on that. But, again, you're seeing Jacob really have stepped up in this stage. You know, Brokey stepped up this stage as well. And then Frozen and Twitch are still playing at a very high level. So if this form holds, this is just going to be a very big defensive battle, it feels like, going into this head-to-head. If we're talking head-to-head history, I have to just look at things that have happened recently, and that is essentially EPL and Chengdu, which, of course, MOUZ were able to win in pretty one-sided fashion. You know, even their weakness, Ancient, they were able to get the wins on. Then they also got the win on Overpass and the win on Inferno, and so definitely it is fading in their favor. As far as the pick ban goes, that is going to be an interesting one. We have seen that MOUZ have had the trend of banning a lot of DusT 2, and I would imagine they would probably stick to that. I mean, that's the amount they've maintained the ban on at Chengdu and at the Major, but there is a small chance I could see them maybe try to cover a vulnerability that FaZe could exploit on Nuke. Like, there is that small chance, right? When you look at a team like FaZe, they don't really play Train, they don't really play Overpass, so I feel like they're going to spread their ban one of those directions. I mean, I think they've banned Train in pretty much every best of 3 they've played this major, so with MOUZ being a strong Train team, that's one of their highlights. That's probably where they're going to go with it. So, again, I imagine Train's going to be the ban. I imagine DusT 2 will probably remain the ban for MOUZ, though they could potentially try to cover Nuke or something like that. Would be maybe something to look at. As far as picks go, going into the rest of the best of the 3, if you're FaZe, if DusT 2 is available, because MOUZ decides to try to cover Nuke, then I think you probably should go for a DusT 2 pick, in my opinion. I think that would serve you pretty well. But if they leave Nuke open, I think that is a map that FaZe could potentially put to good use. You know, I do think that their Nuke actually has shown some strong points at points this season, and so I really could see them go that route, you know, all things considered. I mean, we obviously saw them use it against Vitality in the opening BO1 this stage, where they were to get the win there, you know, pretty well. Yes, they've got a spread of wins between like DusT 2, Inferno, Overpass, and Mirage against 3D Max and Passion UA. Against NiP, it was Inferno and Nuke. That was good for them, that they got to win over Aurora on DusT 2 and win over Passion UA on DusT 2. Again, MOUZ probably bans DusT 2, so they can't really put that to use. And then when you kind of look at some of the other games, they obviously won against Lin Vision on Nuke, and you look at the win on Nuke against Red Canids, but that was kind of a magical thing, and they actually lost Nuke to Fluxo, but then beat them on Inferno Mirage. So they had some chances on Inferno Mirage, but I really feel like Nuke is probably where they're going to be very powerful. As far as what MOUZ does, I don't really know, because I feel like Ancient has been weak for them, despite the fact they've been able to beat FaZe both times that they've played Ancient. So I don't really see that being a factor. In fact, that could be like a second rotation ban option, I think. I think going for Overpass could be an interesting one, because it's another map that FaZe has struggled on, and since they're banning Train, you could maybe go for a potential, you know, Overpass look, you know, as a punish or something along those lines. But it's also true that MOUZ has shown a pretty decent strength on Inferno. That is like one of the maps where their T-side discrepancies hasn't really come to bite them compared to some of the other maps in the pool where I really feel like they've had their issues. So I feel like Inferno would be probably a good direction to go in this particular case, but I do think Overpass is a potential option. If in some weird world FaZe does a non-train ban, train would obviously be a direction that MOUZ would go as well. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And so if we're kind of going across the board, DusT 2 likely gets banned. If it does get played, it could really go either way in my opinion. I think Mirage should go either way in my opinion. Just because of how bad the T sides have been for MOUZ on Mirage, and just in general, it's been kind of a 50-50 map more recently for them. So I could kind of see that one going either direction. I do think Inferno has been pretty good for MOUZ, and so I definitely do favor them there, though we have seen FaZe be able to do some good things on Inferno as well at times. I do favor FaZe on Nuke. I think that is a map they could pick into and have some success on, and could make this a 3-map series because of that, unless MOUZ does something crazy and decides to go for a Nuke ban and leaves DusT 2 open, in which case maybe that vulnerability kind of goes away. And then, yeah, MOUZ is going to have the edge on what's ever left between Train and Overpass for them to pick if they want to pick that first instead of Inferno. But it's also a situation where if they pick Inferno and FaZe is able to ban Train, you know, first rotation, ban Overpass second rotation, then that really is going to kind of knock out some options for MOUZ that would allow them to do some cool things. In the Ancient, it's just both teams have not been that great on it, honestly. So it's like, I don't fucking know how that's going to go, other than that MOUZ is able to beat FaZe 2 times they have played it this season. So yeah, this is kind of a weird one. It's kind of a mixed bag. I do just feel like MOUZ have overall more sustainable firepower that has performed more actively this season, more consistently. Obviously, Jimmy and Torzy have had some drop off, but Spinks and Zerchin have still been playing pretty well, and I do think Jimmy and Torzy are still good. I think Torzy's still a better operator than Brokey overall. I think Zerchin obviously has more entry impact than any entry fragger on FaZe, and I do think Spinks can somewhat match up to guys like Frozen and Twist on the opposite end, though I will maybe give the Twist-Frozen combo overall a little bit over Spinks and Jimmy as a combo, I guess you could say. As far as in-game leading goes, I think Kerrigan's the better caller than Brolin. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Fragging-wise, Brolin a little bit better, but I don't think it's like I don't know that it's going to matter too much in this series. I think the way the map pool shakes down, you know, there are certainly, again, some vulnerabilities that MOUZ can exploit on like a Train or Overpass, you know, or just go with their strength in Inferno. I do think, you know, FaZe can exploit a Nuke potentially, and, you know, drag us into a 3-mapper because of something like that. But at this point, it's just like, who knows? And really, just because I don't know what FaZe is going to show up. Is the FaZe from the overall season going to show up? Is the FaZe from Stage 1 going to show up? Or is the FaZe that showed some growth, like in Stage 2 and Stage 3, going to continue that growth and actually exploit, you know, some of the T-side woes that Mousesports has had lately, and actually be able to pull off some type of crazy upset and, you know, make it a step further than what they were to do at the Blast Austin Major, where they did fall out in, you know, the quarterfinals, you know, to Mongols, you know, after having kind of a crazy run after having a poor season, kind of similarly to what they're trying to do now again. You know, again, I think the combination of Frozen Twist's firepower, and if Jacob can keep up the pace that he's been in Stage 3, and if Brokey can show up and just play decent, like, they actually do have some chances to win this game. So this is actually a tough one to predict, but I do think MOUZ should be the favorite. They've been the better performer overall this season. They've looked more stable this season, and so they should be the favorite to win this. I do give them the slight nod, but I always know that some FaZe bullshit could happen. And there are some weak points out there that FaZe could catch them on. So we'll have to see how it all shakes down. That's going to do it for this one, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, again, subscribe, like, comment, and I'll catch you on the next one.